All right, and welcome to the podcast. I'm here with Calder Woolums. He's a friend of mine from church. His uncle is my friend Jeff Madzai, filmmaker. His aunt is Marianne Madzai, who I went to school with, and I've known his father John since I was a little kid. We rode the school bus together, and they live. You grew up in Annapolis?
Yeah, Annapolis, Maryland.
And but you guys came to the church when you were in town all the time, and that's how we first met.
Yep.
And I remember immediately just thinking, wow, this is an impressive young man. And we always had some deep discussions, even back when you were still in high school.
Yep.
And I thought, man, I'm still not that deep yet. And I ran into you yesterday, and I should say that we're at his grandmother's house, Jean Woolums, and it's New Year's Day. 10 o'clock in the morning. We're up and at it. First thing I saw him yesterday at church, I said, you should do my podcast, and you're only in town for a couple of days. So we said, let's do it tomorrow. And so Here we are, impromptu. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I think this is a great way to start the new year. I've really wanted to, get more involved in doing things like this in the new year. I think if we can, improve our ability to converse with each other on everything, I think that's really is something powerful for the country in a time when everything is trying to divide us.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to be able to come back and touch base with someone like you who's seen me grow up over the years.
Yeah.
Because they're all kind of memories to me, but for you it's a much more continuous kind of progression of seeing the discussions we had in church all those years ago.
Yeah, because I remember you I think wrote a essay or something to go to the UU camp.
Yes.
And I remember, I think you gave me a copy of that to read, and I thought, wow. And how old were you at that time?
I was probably not much older than 15 when I did church service there at the
right.
church.
Yeah. For a 15-year-old, you had it together. And then when I ran into you in church yesterday, I asked you how school was going, and you said that you just finished your thesis?
Yeah, I just finished my senior thesis out. I go to school at Lewis and Clark College, and I am completing a major in sociology and anthropology out there. So for my thesis, I kind of started exploring. I went to public school my whole life, public elementary, public middle, public high school, and then I ended up going to a private college because of financial aid and all the other stuff. It just became the better opportunity for me. But I really wasn't anticipating the cultural shift between the public education system and these kids at this, expensive private school that I was lucky enough to go to for a discounted price, and their perception of the public school system, and especially being on the West Coast out in Portland, the public school system around the country is not one homogeneous being.
Right.
And so I was lucky enough to go to school in Maryland, which had the best public schools in the country for 5 years in a row during the period that I was there from the early 2000s until I graduated in, I guess it was 2014.
Okay.
And so I was really interested to kind of go back and see, based on my experience in this great public education system, how that translated to what was going on in Oregon, because that was what was accessible to me, ethnographically through the methodology that I had been learning in school as an anthropologist. And I found that in doing so, even the Maryland public education system has some glaring problems.
Right.
So for me, as a middle-class white male, I really reaped a lot of the benefits of this robust public education system. However, just a couple years before I started going to Annapolis High School, they had been indicted by a district court for being one of the most segregated schools in the country.
Really?
And so they still do these studies to show how many minority students are in the highest, the magnet program and the AP classes. And still Annapolis High School, the high school I went to and got a great education from, and a high school that was right up there in one of the best counties and one of the best states in the country, still had some glaring inequalities.
Yeah.
And that was something that I had kind of noticed in school. I was always kind of hyper aware of social dynamics, and because of my own childhood, I had kind of grown apart from a lot of the friends that were kind of like me or looked like me, and started hanging out with kids that I met through my wrestling team and in the weight room, and they were typically poor minority students. And so I became friends with them over the course of going to school, obviously, as you do with
Sure.
anybody. And I began noticing how differently they were treated by the teachers.
Right.
So I have a memory that I always like to go back to of sitting in an art class. And it was just a standard art class that everybody was required to take. And Miss Lovett, I believe her name was calling on people to comment on or critique this piece. And I just remember my friend Juwan sitting in the back, and he would probably fit all of the, characteristics of a troublemaker in school. But I really don't like characterizing people that way.
Right.
And I think that's more put upon them than actually an outward expression of who they are. And so she had no intention of even acknowledging that he had anything to say. And of course, being named after an artist and doing art my whole life, I was a star student in that class. Yeah. So I raised my hand and I say, Miss Lovett, Joanne has a question. And the look on her face, the expression, she was not anticipating that at all. And so I kind of used that as a model to, and now in the current political climate to, use my privilege to illuminate some of these issues. And so that was really the inspiration for my thesis. And I wanted it to be much more polemic, much more focused on the racial inequalities in the school system, and found that even in a 45-page thesis, which was the, page limit for this work, it would be too much, to attend to the racial history of this country and the racial history of public education. So I focused more in on a single piece of legislation, the No Child Left Behind Act, and then explored kind of the contradictions between the policy language and the experience of educators in the classroom.
That's and that's a really important piece of legislation, probably the most important when it comes to education. My brother and my sister-in-law are both school teachers, and they struggle with anybody that I know that's a school teacher. In fact, I had an interesting discussion at a New Year's Eve party last night with a school teacher. She went from teaching at a public school, and she said she hated it and she just wanted to get out of there. And now she's teaching at Lindsley, and she loves it. And the difference between a public school where they have all these mandates and a private school where she can teach, and also just the idea that the students are there to learn. But teaching for the test, I think almost anybody that's a teacher and anybody that's even just a human being that thinks about it knows that that's wrong, but somehow, or that it's not effective in the way that we expect. I wouldn't say that, maybe I don't know enough about to say that's wrong, but it's glaringly ineffective.
It's glaringly ineffective, surely. And that's something, what you just said is something I completely agree with and agreed with going into my thesis. And then based off of a class I was taking this past semester called the Anthropology of Policy, which I was lucky enough, the professor teaching the class is one of 12 professional anthropologists in tenured positions that is studying it in the whole world right now.
Oh, wow.
So she is on the cutting edge of this new application of anthropological methods to the study of policy.
Yeah.
And I used that, and because of that class was able to not only interview teachers, but interview administrators and policymakers to see where those disagreements, how far up the chain those disagreements went before somebody within, the institutional framework of a school has to say, nope, this is the mandate and this is what you have to follow. Yeah. And I was really interested to find that, again, it's not as homogenous as it is often talked about. And even a lot of educators are in administrative capacities. One of the educators I interviewed, Jim Sager, he began teaching in the 80s as a kindergarten teacher, and he was one of only 3 male kindergarten teachers in the entire state of Oregon.
Oh, wow.
And over the course of the next 10 years, he became very involved in the Oregon State the Portland City Teachers Union, and then later became president of the Oregon State Teachers Union, and all while he was still a K-12 educator. And then when Governor Kulongoski was elected in 2002, he was asked to be the Education and Workforce Policy Advisor, Senior Policy Advisor for Kulongoski's administration. So while he, again, was a kindergarten teacher, and he ended up teaching, I think, all the way up to 7th grade over the course of, I guess, the 30 or 40 years that he was teaching. He would also fit the category of policymaker.
Right.
And so that was really interesting to me. And to find that almost across the board, there was this disagreement that testing did not, for one, speak to the developmental progression of the student in the classroom and could actually hurt the mindset of a student who thinks they're doing well or even knows they're struggling, and then they get back these test scores and it just confirms their worst nightmares.
Sure.
And whether that's pressure directly from the teacher, whether it's internal pressure on the student, or whether the parents then use those test scores to say, we have the means, we want to take our student out of this public school because they're clearly failing him.
Yeah.
And send him to a private school. And so it was interesting to illuminate all of those intricacies. And then I used that and asked my dad, who's an education policymaker in Maryland, about the kind of demonization of testing. And he said something that I hadn't heard before, which was, the data doesn't determine the outcome. The testing was really supposed to be implemented as a way to gather data on something that was just arising in the late 90s, which were these glaring achievement gaps.
Yeah.
And with the rise of the internet and the disaggregation of data that came with computing power, they really wanted to see in a tangible way how real these achievement gaps were and where they were and how they could teach to them. Mm. And of course, that kind of exploded like metastasizing cancer.
Right.
And that's really where the teaching to the test came from. And it came out of a place, I think, in some educators' minds and definitely some policymakers' minds of genuinely wanting to improve the public education system.
Well, and I think that, so what it sounds like what you're saying is that originally it was meant to be a yardstick to see how we're doing, and then people, of course, they don't want to come up short on the yardstick, so they just focus on achieving that yardstick. And I think one of the problems with education in general is that we try to treat every student like they're the same person, and we know that everybody learns differently. And I think a lot of kids that misbehave in school, including myself, were just bored.
Right.
Memorization is, I think it's an important skill to a certain extent, but I think we spend a lot of time on that because you have 30 kids, you have an hour with them. The only way that you can feel like you're making any progress a lot of times is to have them memorize something and then test them on that. And just a general explaining ideas to somebody and letting it sink in and not necessarily expecting them to regurgitate it on a test. It's a hard way to measure, but it's probably a better way to learn and to stimulate kids. But and I think in a broader sense, when you're looking at the problems with education, it's the same with the problems with everything in the world, is that these things are so complex.
Right.
There's so many levels to it. And then well-intentioned teachers, policymakers, and just general people that get involved, they want to come up with something to make sense of it and to fix things. And it's just not that easy, I think. And then we also have this tendency as human beings that we come up with an idea and we become attached to it. Yep. And especially if your job and your lifetime career. Same thing happens with doctors and nutrition, and which is something that I'm a little bit more focused on, that you just see that careers and lives and just passions are built around these ideas, and you do want to recognize that it's going off the path that it was intended to. Right. And I think that in the future,
don't want to admit that to
you don't want to admit
yourself
that
professionally or whatever other capacity that you're trying to
spend 30 years like on saying that consume less fat, and then you realize that actually a high fat diet is that. How do you go back and say for the last 30 years I was wrong? That's a hard. I would have a hard time swallowing that pill, and so the same with problems in the education system. Yep. But I think for us to fix the problems that are facing America and the world, that's the kind of thinkers that we need, people that aren't afraid to say, we screwed that up. We went way down this path, and now we need to turn back, which makes me optimistic for people like you coming up, young guys, that you're starting to look at things from all sides and starting to recognize this early on. And my hope is that people will listen to this and that as you grow, and I mean, I think you're going to have a great career ahead of you because you've already achieved so much, that these ideas will be implemented in the future.
I really hope so, because that was something, in writing my thesis that was really exciting, to see the opportunity for growth. Yeah. And to see the places when even in disagreement there were actually corollary disagreements. Yeah. Where educators and policymakers and administrators were all really critiquing the same thing about No Child Left Behind. And it's exciting because we have gotten to a point now where a lot of people are realizing the kind of pitfalls of No Child Left Behind and re-implementing some of the programs that were around before No Child Left Behind. And some of the models like community schooling, and then teachers would do in-service days where they would share their lesson plans and, share their best practices. And No Child Left Behind, because of the funding mandates and the yardstick, made it so that all of that extra time that teachers didn't really have to begin with, but actually saw some value in, because they were sharing their best lesson plans, was all kind of co-opted and used as, all right, we're going to use this time to teach you how to test these students, and how to regulate,
or we're going to lose money if we don't.
Exactly, and that's hard to argue with, and it really puts even principals and people in that kind of middle position in a really tough spot, because all of their professional experience as really education experts. And that's another thing that I think a lot of people don't really recognize in this country, that in a lot of school systems, or at least in the school system I grew up in Maryland, they require that educators, high school educators and elementary K through 12 be working towards their Masters of Education or have their Masters of Education to be teaching in schools. And so almost all of the teachers you see teaching your kids at a high school have a master's degree, and we really don't treat them as the experts that they are. If somebody else had a master's in a field like engineering, or a graduate degree in law, you think they're one of the big three, engineer, doctor, lawyer. And educators in this country really do just as much work to hone their craft. Imagine that. You spend your whole life working on something and you want to be the best at it that you can be. It seems pretty, logical and transparent, but it's actually, not widely recognized in this country. And I think also not something that all school systems across this country can really rise to, because especially after 2008, a lot of school systems were just hit horribly by the financial crisis and have never really bounced back. And so it's hard to demand that from teachers without then providing them resources in the classroom and providing them scholarships to achieve that graduate level education. And then we're only paying them anywhere between $30,000 and $50,000 entry level. And coming out of school at Lewis and Clark, I'm probably going to be making around that with a bachelor's degree, and I'm going into environmental construction. I'm really not even using the degree that I got. Obviously, getting a 4-year degree, bachelor's degree shows some persistence.
That you can accomplish a goal.
Exactly, but it's kind of baffling that these expert educators are so devalued, financially and then culturally.
I think that reflects the fact that even though people say that education of the children is really important, that it really, the whole process is undervalued. I think that probably in a larger sense, I think education kind of got off track a long time ago when we started creating drones, where I think to a certain extent, first, second, third grade, you just got to learn to get along with everybody and learn some basic skills. But I think that for some kids, you have to take math, and they have no instinctual math ability, and they lean more towards art. And I think that an education system where we try to go for more personal development, which means you have to have much better teachers that can recognize the students. You have to be able to motivate students to find something and follow it, and not just,
And that can be a multi-year process.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to just put them in a room with a bunch of different things and see what they gravitate towards.
Yep.
And that you can't do that with 30 per class. You need, that's 5 or 6 per teacher, and so then it becomes a very expensive process. So it is, on one hand, I can look and I think that was one thing that I appreciated, is that you looked at both sides and you didn't demonize one side or the other necessarily.
Right.
You just looked at what's not working.
Right.
And so I can see where, from a financial standpoint, that it makes sense to just get people in and out. And I can see where legislators look and say, we're getting kids graduating high school that can't read. We have to stop this. And so we're going to have these standardized tests, and to make sure that people follow them, we're going to affect their budget. It all makes sense logically on paper, but then in practice, I think you have to look at, but it's creates its own inherent problems. I think that probably, you've studied a lot of philosophy, and I think we might have even talked about this before, but there's a certain yin and yang of things, and there's anytime you make a change in a system, there's going to be an opposite reaction, and you have to look at the pitfalls. And sometimes the well-intended change, the side effects end up being much worse.
Right.
And that's really hard to see. And it's also in a big structure like the United States educational system. How do you change something that's that big?
Right.
So it's a lot to take on, and that's just education.
Right. It's just yeah, exactly. And I think, how do you change such a big system? It, to some extent, unfortunately, really has to happen on both sides, almost simultaneously. With No Child Left Behind, you could say that testing was the argument that I just stated earlier, that testing was really just a yardstick.
Yeah.
But then a more cynical side of that would be that the neoconservative core of politicians at the kind of elite level at that time were really pushing to disenfranchise the country with public education, which is the racial side that a book could be written on.
Yeah.
Because really the history of public education policy, to some extent, parallels the history of desegregation of the American education system. So almost as soon as schools started being desegregated, you saw this explosion of private schools across the country, because primarily white affluent people did not want their students in school with poor African Americans. And if you take that zoom 200 years or 150 years forward to the late 1990s, and you see people like George Bush saying we need choice, and we need opportunity for all, and everybody agrees with that. Everybody agrees that parents should have the choice to put their students in the best school that they want. What a lot of people don't realize is those parents that have the ability and the really now we call it the privilege to move their students out of those schools, actually take funding away from the students that have no ability to decide where they're going to school or how they're being educated.
And that's tough, because you think for the affluent people, how much are they expected to sacrifice, and on the other hand, the people that aren't affluent, how much are they expected to have to suffer?
Right.
And finding a middle ground in there where you just because someone's affluent and they have to maybe not get the best education they can. On the other hand, you're right. If you're taking away from the non-affluent, that's not fair either. And so how do you?
But you can't tell a parent to not do everything they can for their student. That's just never gonna happen. So I think it really takes something like the federal government and then state education administrations to distribute that wealth, to kind of back public education and say all schools can improve, but we need to fund education. That was the universal agreement from lifelong classroom educators to lifelong policymakers, that funding works. That if we fund public education systems, they get better. magnet programs attract even students that have gone to private school their entire lives, which was, Annapolis High School.
Yeah.
My international baccalaureate program that I was in for the last 2 years attracted students from some of these pretty elite private schools in the DC metro area. And so there is a model that works. However, saying there's a model that works and using Maryland is kind of disingenuous to the rest of the country, because after 2008, Obama passed a mandate that kept school systems funded where they were, to maintain funding where they were. However, Maryland, over the previous 10 years, had been infusing $50 million more every year because of a primarily liberal legislature and a liberal Democratic governor. And so we were funding the heck out of education in Maryland.
Yeah.
And then the 2008 crash happened, and Obama said, all right, stay where you're at, which resulted in $700 million of federal funding to the public education system in Maryland. Now, states like Kansas didn't get 10% of that number and have never recovered. And so then, at the federal level, they use Maryland as this national model for public education without giving...
It can't apply across board.
It can apply across the board.
Every state's individual.
Maybe if, we chipped away a little bit of our, military budget and started funding, giving hundreds of millions of dollars to every state to educate their students, we would see the improvement that Maryland has seen.
And I think that along with funding, I think one of the things that probably because I'm a little bit older and I would definitely not call myself a conservative, but I think that there's a fine line with funding where proper application of the funds, maximize every dollar. A long time ago, I saw a story on 60 Minutes, and there were these schools in New York City where they it was goal-based for the students. So they had ways of motivating the students. Mm-hmm. And these schools were highly effective at getting the kids so that great entrance exams for college and just performed well in life, 10, 20 years down the line. And so it's possible, but they also properly applied their funds. And I even and I think this was more of a business model, Japanese company came in, or no, take it back. This is also 60 Minutes. It was a group of wealthy people that would donate money to start up businesses. Mm-hmm. But they would come back every year, and you had a milestone to make, and either you made it or you didn't, because they knew that money was really important to helping people, and either you figured it out, and they would give you a lot of tools to help you figure out. But some people would take the money and they either weren't ready, or they weren't able, or they just weren't trying. And they'd say, as much as we want to help you out, we can't keep throwing money at you when there's somebody else that might be able to get and so they were always looking for a way to maximize the benefit of their cash. And I think that's something that along with proper funding, I think it's really to hone down and say, where are we most effective?
And to regulate it. I think that's very important. Because you don't want to just pile money on the problem. Right. That's not the way to get things done necessarily.
Unfortunately, to properly apply the money, that's very complex, and finding people that are adept at being able to do that is tough, because that's not something that people do generally in their life at all. They buy a brand new car, and I want a swimming pool, I get a swimming pool. And so properly spending your money effectively is just not something that Americans are conditioned to do. I am.
Right.
I feel like
sometimes you self-condition over the course of your life to be better with your money, but to institute that on an institutional level in something like a school system
in a society where that's not valued anyhow. It's
right.
But I think it's probably what's needed, and that in general, I think that oftentimes we don't look at what we're doing and say, this is the goal that we want to achieve. This is the plan we have. How effective is it?
Right. And that's something that's much more attainable at a community level.
Right.
I think you could get a neighborhood together, and a lot of elementary schools are still very neighborhood based, and say, how are we serving you, and where do you think we could do better, and where do you think we're on the right track?
Yeah.
And you could get a principal in the room with a superintendent and with teachers and with parents, and that's something that was really happening, before No Child Left Behind, and I'm sure people would argue that there's still, the PTA, those organizations are, still fighting that fight. But I think we need to get back to kind of on each end. The policymakers need to realize that some of these policies just kind of steamroll the work of the people in the classroom, and
tied their hands behind their back. Yeah,
exactly. And then we need to provide more opportunities for people to really get invested in their own education.
Yeah.
And I think moving away from an assumption that 4-year degrees are for everybody could be useful, because if you can give students the opportunity to work and make money, that will invest them in those kind of crucial last 2 years of high school,
Yeah.
where if you're already of working age and you're working a minimum wage job and you really don't see how a high school diploma is going to be worth it, and you certainly don't see how a college diploma is going to help you in your station where you're at. And so if we implement jobs programs, which is another huge,
Yeah.
we could almost kill two birds with one stone if you connect public education systems and education systems to the local businesses and say, we can provide you students in training, but tell us what they need training in.
Yeah.
And then we go back to the drawing board, and that's how we craft curriculums, and that's it goes back to put a student in a room and see what they gravitate
Yeah.
towards. We need to provide students with more opportunities to gravitate towards, rather than just saying you need to go into thousands of dollars of debt
Right.
and get a 4-year college degree.
I think you're absolutely right. First of all, those lower-end jobs are going to be replaced by computerization and robotics. I think one day McDonald's won't have any employees.
Right.
They'll be able to they probably could mechanize it now if they could get the public to appeal to that. So for someone that doesn't go to college, having a skill where they can get a decent...
Right. Having a trade like welding, I mean, even though robots are going to take a lot of jobs like that, you talk to master welders and master plumbers, they're never going to invent a robot that is cheaper than a plumber.
Yeah.
And plumbers make good money.
Yeah.
It's
a good career.
They can provide for a family. And I think that's something that we also don't recognize in this country anymore. That blue-collar jobs still in this day and age are in such high demand in this country now that you can really make enough to live comfortably.
Well, I have a college degree, a bachelor's, and I'm starting a service business because just what you mentioned, my brother teaches at a vocational school, and these kids come back a couple years after school to say hi, and they're driving new cars and everything, and meanwhile the kids that went to 4-year college are working at Starbucks.
Yep.
And I think that you're absolutely right that there's nothing wrong with a trade. In fact, it's a great way to make an honest living.
And they're not jobs that can really be exported or imported.
Right.
It's so expensive we might as well just train them here.
Yeah, and it's there's such a high need for those kind of jobs that most of those kids, when they get out of high school, they immediately get to work, and they're making $40,000 a year instead of spending $40,000 a year to go to college. Plus, I think there's been a big change in the university education system, where it used to be like when I got out of high school, my parents said you have to go to college and it'll give you a leg up on everybody else, which that was starting to just fade away. When my dad was younger, if you had a college degree, you had it made. Not everybody had one, and now they're everywhere. And not that online colleges are terrible, but colleges have become a business,
right?
And it's more about just getting the money, getting that student loan, and getting people in. And I know when I went to OU, I was dating this girl in the freshman dorm, and everybody had their own private room that had 4 bunks in it, but they had their own room. And they said at the beginning of the year, every bunk was filled. And as people moved out, everybody would move into an empty room. And by the end of the school year, people had their own room. And I knew quite a few people that knew that they weren't coming back, but they figured they'd stay and party till the end of the year. And so they have these kids come in as freshmen, and they have like 1 year of college, but they really don't. Either they're not ready for college, or they don't get enough support and they drop out. The school got 1 year's tuition out of them, and I know sitting in my living room between my senior year in college, looking at the catalog, wondering what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I had no idea, but I had to pick something.
Yeah.
Then my friend Sean, who was in the Army for 2 years, and he had a much different approach. He had time to think about it, had time to go out and kind of have these wild adventures, and he was a much more serious student. He knew more about what he wanted to do. He didn't have a problem staying in on a Friday night.
Right, you come back more invested in your education.
Yeah.
If you can see a future for it.
He didn't want to be in the Army the rest of his life, and he didn't want to just work at whatever job. I think he had a couple jobs after that, and he finally said, GI Bill, I can go to college. And I think, I think my parents were definitely well-intentioned, planting the seed in my head that you're going to college after high school, no answers or buts, but I don't know that it served me well, because I was 3 years into college before an advisor came to me and said, so what's your major going to be? Because I really hadn't declared yet, and I'm like, I still don't know. So we ended up coming up with the general studies degree, which was very taboo, I guess. Maybe not taboo, but it was
new at the time.
Yeah, and it was considered like a cop out or a salad or not getting a degree of general studies. But now I look back and I think I at least got a college education that was based on things that I was interested in. Right. And I think for people going to college nowadays, I think more and more that's probably the best way to go, is just to get a degree in things that you find interesting. Yeah. Especially unless it's an engineer or something like that, where you need that specific degree to get that job.
Yep.
But gosh, it's
so
complex.
Even just becoming acclimatized to putting your arguments out there, and working with a team at that level, at the collegiate level, I think is still a benefit to a lot of students.
I agree.
And that general studies is now probably just called a liberal arts education,
right.
And a lot of colleges are making a lot of money off of those degrees. Right. And so it's certainly, I think, still worthwhile to a lot of students to have access to those opportunities in those climates. And one of the things that over the course of the last 4 years, I have one semester left at Lewis and Clark, I realized that what I'm actually going to value looking back on Lewis and Clark are not necessarily the parties, not necessarily like a big group of friends, but the connections that I made with the professors that I had, and the times where I would go into class and leave seeing the world a completely different way. And I think providing those opportunities to students is still hugely important, and especially important in this day and age, to put kids together and make them explore these new realities together, rather than sitting at home getting an online degree. I don't think that necessarily achieves the same kind of discourse, and it certainly doesn't get people comfortable with disagreeing and comfortable with having to change their minds. Because in class, if somebody makes an argument or if I make an argument and then somebody makes a counter argument, and it's clear that I've just missed a point, I have to accept that I'm wrong.
Right.
And I have to accept that I'm wrong in front of 30 other people that are also there to explore the same thing.
Sure.
They don't necessarily think any less of me because I got that one aspect wrong, but you really only get comfortable with that over time. It's, I think, really easy to get defensive and even hold tighter to your wrong decision.
Yeah, and some people they never get over that. Yeah,
exactly. And I think I'm kind of acutely aware of that kind of stuff, and still have to work every day to kind of make arguments and let them lie. Yeah. And if I'm wrong, and then I'll accept that and change my thinking. And I think that's something that we can all work on.
Yeah, and I'm wrong often, and I'm pretty flexible on just about everything. It's my opinion at the moment based on the idea I have, and I'm sure there's some things I said on the podcast in the first 10 podcasts that I completely think different about. But I kind of embrace being wrong, because then that means I learned something, and I think once you get used to saying, "Oh, I was wrong about that," it's very empowering to be able to see some. Yeah, well, I was wrong. That's okay, and moving on. If you can embrace being the kind of person that does that, you see that's actually much more powerful than being the kind of person that's irresolute and won't back down. And I certainly, what I took the most from my education, which for the longest time I thought I kind of blew it, because I never really got like this great high-powered job in advertising, which is what my degree ended up kind of focusing on. By the time I got the degree, I realized that I didn't want to talk people into buying things they don't need, and it's a really cutthroat business from just a little bit of experience I had. Yeah. So I kind of thought, man, 4 years, spent all this money. But what I realized years later is that just expanding my horizons.
Yeah.
That bridging that gap where you're on your own was important for me, because I kind of had more of a sheltered childhood, but also just meeting people from other cultures and exploring new ideas, and just that whole experience in itself, thinking how to think and taking classes where they challenged me and where I had to rise to the occasion. And it's funny, I took one of the very first desktop publishing classes ever offered at Ohio University, and I did terrible at it. And but I had a work-study job at the theater, and they had a brand new Macintosh computer, one of the first ones, and they showed me really quick how to design a flyer on the Macintosh, and it was basically desktop publishing. And I sat there in an afternoon and learned how to do on a Macintosh what I couldn't do in a whole semester of a class that tried to teach me that. And so that right there was just a good life lesson. So I kind of learned things through the back door by being at college but certainly I would have never known that. We had a few black students in school, but not many, and they were athletes and I wasn't. And then there were no gay people in school that we knew of, and so just going, and certainly people from any other country was very rare. We had some exchange students, I think, but never had a chance to know them. Then I went away to college, and I met not only people from different backgrounds, but even just like white kids that were into punk rock music that was not popular around here, and just that expanding of my horizons was for me the value of college, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Okay. Now I'd like to go back and study and actually learn more.
Right.
But I think I still get a pretty good value out of it.
Yep. And I think like striking that balance, because all of those kind of intangibles are so essential and essential in life.
Yeah.
You realize, I realize in working in construction especially, and my uncle taught me a lot of what got me started in construction. I spent 2 summers out in Portland gutting and then renovating his house out there. So I did everything from electric to drywall to tiling to roofing to, you name it, he made me do it.
Yeah.
And so then I was able to get some seasonal labor positions that pay well over the summer. It's hard to go to a McDonald's or just a minimum wage place. If you do a little work to hone a skill, you can find some good construction work seasonally.
Sure.
And then over that time, I ended up being offered a job at a construction company that said, "Oh, you're not only a summer worker, you're actually working towards a 4-year degree."
Yeah.
But in doing so, I realized there's so many things that you really can't learn in a classroom.
Right.
You just have to learn them by doing them on the job site or in the office. And there's so much on the job training that I think we get away from.
Right.
And is essential to the way we live our lives. There has to be a balance between what you read in a textbook, so everybody's on the same level, and then what can't be taught in other school than through doing.
And my friend Carter, he said that the best skill to have in this modern era is the ability to learn.
Yep.
If you can just have the ability to learn and adapt, that's where you'll succeed. And I think he's right. There was, and this was years ago, I heard that the jobs that were available when someone graduated college, say in 2000, weren't even invented when those people started school in 96.
Yep.
So web designer, and so as technology explodes, these new jobs are created and these new fields spring up overnight, and they become very huge. I'm kind of somewhat interested in Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. That just kind of came out of nowhere, but for people that are able to adapt to it, there are a lot of people that are making good livings out of that. So
trade, certainly.
Yeah. In fact, this is how old I am. Before I learned desktop publishing in school, I also learned linotype, which is you type it in, it prints out a strip, and then you paste it on a board, and then they take a picture of it, and that's how you do a newspaper. And all newspapers were done that way, and that was advanced compared to taking little metal tiles with the letters. And by the time I got out of college, there was the company that I worked for, a magazine. We had a few people that were still doing linotype, but after a couple of years, that faded out and everything went to just Macintosh and desktop publishing, which luckily from the theater class I had, I learned work study. I learned the Macintosh and desktop publishing. And I took one photography class, and so my job there was desktop publishing and working in a darkroom from 2 classes that I took.
Yep.
And that kind of brings me, when it comes to college education, the idea that I think a lot of people see that as college job.
Yep.
College equals getting a job, whereas I think for anybody thinking about going to college, you should think about it as college versus setting me up for the life that I want to lead,
right?
Including a job, but also expanding your horizons culturally and just figuring out who you are. And I think that was one of the big things, is just for me to see myself with more options and as a different person, and to I guess I never embraced the career life. I always more embraced just a life where I could make enough of a living to be happy.
Yeah.
And it's still, I think, not seen, it's not valued by a lot of people, but I more and more I think that maybe people are starting to see that it's better be happy than rich. I don't know.
I hope so. I think that's definitely a philosophy that I ascribe to, and it's interesting having a younger brother who's studying financial economics at UMBC, and he always told me, want to make $1 million before I turn 30.
Right.
And so having that kind of stark comparison between my philosophy and his has been a really interesting kind of reflexive period of growth for me, to say other people can value what they want to value, but I can also be comfortable and happy doing something that is not as popular in the collective culture. And I think, like you said, it really seems to me to be where we need to be moving, to a more fluid understanding of what like life and professionalism means, because I think everybody can agree that Americans work way too much, whether it's on Wall Street or in a blue collar position.
Right.
We don't have enough time with our families. We don't have enough time, everything from maternity leave to vacation time. And having jobs like you and I are talking about allow you a little more leeway to kind of focus on, for me, a big thing is my artistic passions. Outside of academics, I really like to do a lot of drawing, sculpting, painting, writing, and it's unlikely that I'll ever make enough money off of that alone to support myself. However, through working in environmental construction, I do have to get to the job site at 6 a.m. every day, but that means I'm off by 3.
Right.
And I have the whole weekend to myself. So to have the entire evening and every weekend to be able to focus on my art and stuff like that really attracted me to that job over working a 60 or 70 hour work week at a law firm or going straight into graduate school. I definitely think I could see myself doing a graduate program in the future, whether it be through professional improvement, whether it be through a company that's sending me to graduate school or something of that nature. But I'm really excited after finishing this 4-year degree to just have time to get back to my hobbies, and to spend some time really kind of exploring writing and sculpting and things that you don't necessarily have time for in the curriculum of an education in the same creative capacity that I would like.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think I make movies and I do a podcast, and other things make money, and I love my motorcycles, and Lord knows that costs money at this point, but that's the stuff that I value, and so I can't say, I don't want to say I feel sorry for people because I don't want to put anybody down, but I know for me the satisfaction I get from having these things in my life and not having to worry about them making money, which gives me a lot of freedom to pursue these artistic things or these things that interest me without worrying about it. In the podcast, I figured if anybody listens to it, that's great. 10 people, 100 people, got as many as 300-400 downloads on some of them, which was outstanding for me. But in the future, I'll keep doing them. I don't look at the numbers. I don't have to because it's not my job. And so I think the freedom to be able to pursue that and just the sense of satisfaction I get from pursuing a goal and achieving it, and the outside of what I have to do to make money, just it really enriches my life. And I think for some people, they're so busy with their job, and they may not even like the job, but then they come home and they don't have any energy left to even explore what they're passionate about. They don't know what they like because they either haven't taken the time or they don't have the time. And then just the idea of one of the older guys that I grew up around, he told me all the time about this guy that worked construction in the summer, started making good money, went out and bought a boat. He said, "Why are you buying a boat? We work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. When are you going to have time for a boat?" He goes, "Oh, I'll have time." Well, first summer he had it out 2 times, and they sold it. He's like, "I think I need a snowmobile," because they get laid off every winter. And he's like, "You get all kinds of time to ride a snowmobile." But the idea of spending time that you don't have away from your family to buy things that you don't need, and people get caught up in that rat race that they're working and they're overtime to pay for a car and a house that they don't have time to enjoy driving or have time to spend. I could be nice to have a $20,000 Harley Davidson, but I would have to work overtime every week and in the summer, and I wouldn't have time to ride it. So I ride a $4,000 Yamaha, and I have all kinds of free time to enjoy that.
And you can tool around on it and joyride on it, just probably getting just as much enjoyment out of it as that $20,000 price tag.
It's certainly just having the time to enjoy it, and the fact that I could have 2, and it's still only, which I do, and it's still less money than 1, and that goes more to deeper life philosophy, and I guess for me it's so innate that I've always kind of felt that way, that I don't mean to put down other people, but any other way of living seems crazy, even though I think I'm probably unusual for most people that I know to not be on that hamster wheel. And I have people all the time like, "You need to get a new car." I'm like, "Nah."
And some people thrive on that hamster wheel, and I think we need people that thrive on that hamster wheel to keep things going. Just in the recent interview that came out with President Barack Obama, he said, "I was speaking with my lawyer after this past summer, after he was no longer president, and his lawyer said, 'There's something that needs your attention urgently. We really need to get this thing done right away.'" And so Obama, emails or calls him back and says, "All right, I can be ready tomorrow." And his lawyer says, "Oh no, we'll get to this in the next 2 weeks." And Obama responds, "All right, just know that where I come from, urgently means I need to make a decision in the next half an hour or somebody dies."
Right. You're the President of the United States.
And so we need people that thrive at that level.
Yeah.
But I think for me personally, I really like working with my hands, and I really like taking the time to kind of process things. And I can definitely hang in that on that hamster wheel if I need to, but it's not really where my heart is. And I think having the ability to do both and having the ability to really take time to focus on your passion is something that is important to my life philosophy, and not necessarily something that I feel I need to impose upon other people, but is going to be something that I focus on leaving time for, regardless of whether I have whether I keep up with the Joneses per se.
And that's really a mature way to look at things, that just because it works for me, I shouldn't impose that on other people, and it's not for other people. And I know that I was listening to this interesting conversation where somebody said, "I hate corporations," and a guy said, "Well, you have an iPhone, don't you?" It takes a corporation to make an iPhone. You drove a car here. 3 guys in a little shop aren't going to make a Honda Accord.
No, it's just unfeasible.
And as much as I think that people should eat really healthy food, you can't grow enough celery for everybody to eat the way that I eat. It would be very difficult. So, as much as we hate the way BP treats the environment and stuff like that, nobody complains that there's a gas station. You never worry about there being enough gas for your car.
Right.
And so we can sit there and say that we hate those corporations. So I'm constantly reminded to not demonize people that, and it's very easy for me to even fall in that trap because I kind of did it just now. But yeah, to recognize that there does take all types and that everybody provides their own part of the process.
Yep.
I think that the one thing that we can all work on is just leading more thoughtful lives.
Yep.
Leading a life of intention where you're not just going through life and it's happening to you, that you're actually, if you want it, like your brother wants to go into finance, if that's what he wants to do, and it's not because outside forces are he's mindlessly going into it, but
right.
That's what he wants to do, then that's great. And I think
he wants to be able to try, he has all of these personal motivations for that. And I think, that is just as genuine as my personal motivation to do art in my free time. Whereas
maybe somebody that went into that career just because, well, my grandfather did it, my father did it, and all my friends in school were doing it, so I guess I'll do it. That's not going to necessarily lead you to a happy life, and
right.
And so I think just in everything that you do, I try to be as thoughtful, and sometimes it's maddening, but I try to be as thoughtful about what I'm doing. And the other thing I think that I seems like you're pretty good at is just taking chances and trying new things, and Lord knows I embrace failure, so that helps me a lot, and I always say that whenever I start something new, I want to be the best that there ever was at it, and but I know that I'll probably, I'm okay if I'm like the worst that there ever was, and if I land somewhere in the middle, I'm usually pretty content. I'd love to have 100,000 downloads on every podcast, but I started out thinking that I might get 5. Right. So when I get several hundred, I'm very content with that.
Yep.
And I've definitely made a lot of mistakes. I had one where I didn't properly check my wiring and the batteries. I didn't realize I was on battery power, and like 20 minutes in it died, and we talked for 10 minutes without the machine on. That's why I always know to glance down at it now. But that was one mistake. I went on the beginning of the podcast. And you'll notice that there's a big break there. Well, I messed up and admit that you made a mistake,
right, and be transparent. And I think that's another thing that is more broadly applicable is to lead your life intentionally and I think compassionately, and also be transparent in your successes and your failures. Yeah. Because a lot of that critical learning happens with those failures. So why are we only kind of putting forth our successes? I mean it's easy to understand why on a surface level, but if we really care about helping each other, the failures are just as important as the successes.
And I think at the end of the day, even if you worry about what other people think, the person that kind of had that meteoric career that never made a mistake versus the person that fell down 5 times and still made it, that's the one that people appreciate more, because I think that's the one that people relate to the most, and that's more closer to the way life really is.
Right.
And so there's something to be said for being a role model for, I lost 10 times before I won.
Right.
And
that yin yang, that ebb and flow, I think is crucial to kind of the meat of life. I certainly wouldn't be as satisfied necessarily with just some meteoric rise. I would really be concerned about what I wasn't learning and why I was so successful all the time. Because I don't think anybody is.
Right.
And so if you get to a point in life where you're surrounded by people that just see everything you're doing as successful, I think you really need to rethink whose perspective am I not attending to? Who's getting left behind in my rise to the top? Who has some insight that could be really useful here? Maybe sitting at a table in a board meeting. Who hasn't spoken?
Yeah.
Who would never be expected to have a good idea that could actually really kind of revolutionize what we're doing right now, and that can happen anywhere from the pre-work meeting that we have on the construction site to the classroom to the boardroom. But really paying attention to, all right, I'm successful in what I'm doing, but who else could I elevate with my own success? Who else has a voice here that needs to be heard?
Yeah, and that's good to recognize that, because some people are just shy. Yep. And even going back to the education system, not everybody grows up with parents that make them go to bed on time and make sure they have breakfast before they go to school, and so to be able to look at that's a very unique skill that you have that's really important, to be able to look at everybody and see that they're special and that they're important, and not to write anybody off, which I think happens a lot. So people like you that have that mindset going into it is so beneficial to whatever organization that you're involved with or whatever community you're in. Because I think far too often, right now I'm a receptionist at Willing Hospital, and I was explaining to one of the doctors that I wanted to, do other things, and he said, "But you're a receptionist." And he couldn't understand. Like, he goes, "But how do you know how to do all that?" He goes, "But you do this," and I was shocked but he just kind of saw me as one thing, and he's a doctor, and he just hasn't had that experience. He's been focusing on fixing people's diseases, but it was kind of shocking to me that he was just so shocked that I actually could do other things besides print out documents and page doctors. And
people are much more complex than their job title.
They are.
I mean, even at the elite level.
Yeah. And that the Fugazi song, you're not what you own, you're not what you do.
Yep.
I think that's, for a lot of people, that is the case. But for me, I certainly would not say James Wodarcyk, receptionist at Willing Hospital. I would put 10 other things before that.
Yep.
But if you're a doctor, maybe that would be the first thing you put, because it's a little bit more of a serious career.
Yeah.
So again, I guess that comes back to each his own. I was going to ask you, so environmental construction.
Yep.
Is that solar panels, or how? If you could just explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So the company that I work for, I just kind of fell into it. I was applying to different internship programs at Hopkins and the Maryland Archive, and I was beat out. I got to the last 3 of the Maryland State Archive and was beat out by a graduate student from GW. Imagine that, me as a sophomore undergraduate getting to the second spot and being beat out by a graduate student, of course, to some extent. And so I kind of, had already decided to come home for the summer and needed to find work. And so I look for work, and I'm, a liberal environmentalist myself, and so I was just interested in that kind of construction. And growing up in Annapolis, the Chesapeake Bay Watershed and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, there's just a lot of work being done to revitalize that ecosystem. And so that comes in many different forms, everything from reducing the sediment load in the water by planting natural grasses, to changing the way fishers fish. But through this company specifically, Environmental Quality Resources, they specialize in stream restoration, wetland restoration, and then stormwater and wastewater management.
Oh, wow.
And so I think if a lot of people could picture the way LA deals with a lot of their wastewater in just these kind of concrete coffers.
Yeah.
That was really popular for a long time in this country. But it's not actually effective at reducing the force of the water. So once those systems fail, the concrete itself does nothing to slow down the force of the water, which gives it more erosive potential in weather events, which means it carries more sediment and carries more debris and refuse into these waterways. And so what my company does, or our company does, is take those kind of dilapidated wastewater systems and rebuild them to look like a natural stream system.
Nice.
So using boulders, using logs that exist in the environment there already, planting native grasses, and making these stream systems that are multifunctional, kind of make them functional for their industrial purpose, while also making them better for the environment.
Yeah.
And we found that in doing so, it actually decreases the pollution. You can build rock structures, and you can by planting these grasses and using the existing environment, streams actually have a natural tendency, a natural ability to regulate themselves. And so if we go back and build them correctly, and that's a combination of engineers doing complex math and in their computer simulations, and guys that have been doing construction for 40 years and just know the physics of how things work in a tangible way. And so combining all of that knowledge with kind of environmentalism and the funding of Maryland and the kind of consortium of the Chesapeake Bay watershed from New York all the way down to West Virginia. It's really cool for me to be able to apply my interest in working with my hands into something professionally.
Sure.
And say, yeah, I have to get up at 6 a.m. every day, but I'm outside all day, every day. Through rain, there were days we got to the job site, and I was working in the summer. I think the hottest day worked 8 hours in 109 degree heat.
Wow.
And that's not something a lot of people could do.
Yeah.
But I thrived in it. And there were days we would get to the job site and there would be a small herd of deer grazing down on the lower part of the job site. Because we're doing stream restoration, there are these beautiful seabirds called osprey in Maryland. I'm sure they're probably around quite a few places. But we would watch them dive down into the stream and pick up fish. And we're like, we're working in this stream all day, and we don't think fish that big exist.
Yeah, and then come and pluck one out.
Pluck one right out, and then we see it eating the fish on a tree right above us while we're working. Oh my God,
that's awesome.
And so, you couldn't buy a corner office with that view.
No, absolutely not.
And so I just loved it. And to be able to give back to the environment while, also it's construction to some extent. You're still using all of the construction equipment you would see on the side of the highway.
Right.
But instead of paving asphalt, we're primarily tearing up asphalt and concrete and laying down, dirt, sediment, clay, and really doing a kind of holistic approach to wetland and stream restoration.
Well, it seems like, Mother Nature kind of had it figured out long before we came along.
No way.
And
Are you kidding me? She has a few thousand years on us. A few million years on us, I hear.
So so I love that not only is it more beautiful, but it actually is more effective. And I also like the fact that you embrace the fact, like, when it's bad weather, because every now and then, actually quite often, I'll get caught in the rain riding a motorcycle, and there's something about it's miserable to a certain extent, but there's also, I made it home, and I do CrossFit, which a lot of people might laugh at, but you're faced with a really tough challenge every morning at 5 a.m. that it's good for you. It's good to not have everything be easy. In fact, almost every day I have something that I have to do that's really tough, and it's 90% of the time it's self-imposed. It doesn't come from my job or from my friends or my family. It's a challenge that I gave myself, and now that I'm old enough to really, I willingly seek out these challenges because I realize how much they nourish your soul and how much they give you self-confidence. And so for you there's got to be a satisfaction when it's like a really crappy rainy day and you get home and you're like, but I made it. I didn't quit. Or a really hot day and you persevered and you didn't let that stop you.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And it makes you appreciate the days when the weather's perfect.
Oh.
And that's the other thing.
And that is the beautiful thing. That is something I'm so glad you hit on, because it's so hard to achieve that in anything else that I do. I think you don't realize that the bad makes the good so much better.
Yeah.
There would be days when, I think there was a day we had to fill 300 yard by yard sandbags, those 1-ton sandbags,
right.
Because we had to build a cofferdam to divert half the stream to one side so we could work on one side in a slightly drier condition than full stream flow. And over the course of creating those 300 sandbags, I think we were probably maxing out at 60, 70 sandbags a day, which is a lot of sandbags.
Yeah.
But in that time, we got a series of horrible weather events. And so there was one day when, out of the 30 crews that worked for this company, we were the only crew that was working, because a lot of stream restoration, if you're in the stream, you can't work.
Yeah.
There's too much sediment. It's dangerous. And sometimes, based on environmental regulations, it's illegal to work in the stream after a high flow weather event.
Yeah.
And so we would be filling sandbags and just torrential downpour.
That sand gets heavy when it gets wet.
And the sand gets heavy when it gets wet. It gets inside all your clothes, and you're just hating life. I mean, there's really no way to.
It's miserable.
There's no silver lining to that experience. But then you come back 2-3 days later, and there's no rain, and it's a beautiful blue sky day, and you just kind of take a moment and bask in it. And I don't think I would appreciate that in the same way.
I agree. It makes you appreciate the good things in it, and for me, the self-confidence you get from rising to the occasion, and I think oftentimes people seek lives of comfort on every moment of the day, and it's the number one goal, not realizing that comfort actually leads to discomfort.
Yeah, and discomfort leads to comfort.
Yeah,
in a weird way.
Yeah,
you know,
they have that, where you can, as much as like if someone that works really hard and out, having a day where they sit around and watch Netflix, they can really appreciate it. But if all you do is sit around and watch Netflix, it after a while,
you stand up and
and man, there's nothing on TV, and I have nothing else to, and so
I've watched everything that I'm interested in watching, and you're like, why isn't there more stuff to watch? And it's like, well, how long have I just been sitting here?
Yeah, and so that's anybody, and the reason why I bring this up to anybody that's listening to that pick something that you're not good at. Put yourself in a comfortable zone. I was never physically fit when I was younger, and now that I've taken up exercise, and getting up at 4 a.m. and going to the gym sucks almost every morning when I get out of bed. But leaving the gym at 6 a.m., having done a workout, feels great. And I know how much it's changed, not just me physically, but just mentally, the amount of confidence that I have, and just what the empowerment that I get from being able to. There's something about pulling out of the gym and you drive by McDonald's and people are getting their morning coffee and you know that, man, I already just kicked ass.
Yep, my day is already kick-started.
Yeah, yep. and you just, I walk into work smiling and happy, and they're like, why are you so happy? Well, get some endorphins going, and I accomplished something already this morning, and one of my coaches, Michael, he says, man, this is the hardest thing you'll do all day, and he's right, and but then, gosh, the rest of the day just seems so much easier. You're not doing 50 burpees or
right.
Whatever. Yeah, and I also wanted to go back to shaping the environment, kind of jumping around here a little bit, but I don't think I read this today. I probably heard it on a podcast where they introduced wolves into this park. Mm-hmm. And they found that the introduction of the wolves changed the course of the stream because they affected the deer population, and so they grazed less in certain areas, which meant that sediment built up. And actually, over the course of years, rerouted the stream.
Yep. And streams will do that. That's what a lot of people don't realize. Streams are almost alive, if you will. They really do react so minutely to these changes in the ecosystem. It's kind of beautiful to watch.
It is, and I think it's really great that you're involved with a company that's working on that, and that there are people out there that see a value in fixing the environment, just not for the sake of, well, we're environmentalists, so this is what we do, and some people find that annoying, but they see that there's actually a real positive effect on everybody's life, whether it's something you believe in or not, that it's tangible in a way that, I think most people listening to this are already probably pretty environmentally conscious, but if you're not, hopefully hearing that will make you realize that these projects aren't just vanity or for someone that some hippie came up with because they love the earth too much, that it's actually really beneficial to everybody.
Yeah. And it's really interesting working on the job site. I would probably say 4 out of 5 people at this company would not describe themselves as bleeding heart liberals, certainly, and would not describe themselves as environmentalists. Yeah. This company was started as a subsidiary of one of the largest concrete construction companies that specializes in concrete in Maryland, just based off of one of the brothers of the family said, all right, I want to start this tangent. I want to do an environmental business. And so it kind of grew out of this, hardcore construction tradition. And so that's still the mentality of a lot of people at the company, but everybody shows up to work and is ultimately affecting really positive change on the environment. So I think it's really kind of wonderful how this allows everybody to be invested in a different capacity. Yeah. Some people are just there because it's good money.
Paycheck, yeah.
Some people are there because it's a different challenge every day. Some people are there because they couldn't stand a job sitting behind a desk all day. Right. And then some people, I think like me, are there for a combination of all of those reasons. And then it makes me feel really good that I'm contributing to the environment. Yeah. And I think for me, long term, I'm really interested in applying the knowledge and experience that I get within this company to the larger issues of climate change and the larger issues of sea level rise. And I was talking with my dad a couple weeks ago, and he said, how amazing would it be if you could apply the knowledge you have building, diverting streams that are eroding too far into this bank or that bank, and go to a place and build a seawall or divert a stream that flash floods and causes mudslides, and you could actually end up saving a small village of 1,000 people or more with this knowledge that was just acquired through kind of a rigidly professional construction environment, and say, how can I be creative and apply this knowledge to some of these larger problems that really kind of motivate me in the long-term trajectory of my life.
And I think that there's a lot of value in your end game being to help to make things better. That's one of the reasons why I didn't get really into advertising, is because I just thought there was a certain ruthlessness to it that I didn't like what it did to my soul, the thought of it. But now, so working at a hospital, I feel like we're helping people get better. So I like that the larger goal of whatever I'm doing is to help people, and now I'm starting, for lack of a better word, a handyman business, and actually talking to your grandma and some of the other women at church yesterday. I realized there's a lot of widows that they just don't have people around to help them. Even though your uncle lives across the street, he's busy. And so
he has a bad back some days.
Yeah, and he's got his home, and so modern life, people were busy, and so where I was seeing a need in the marketplace in the service industry where I could make a pretty good income with a flexible schedule, which is all things that I'm looking for. But then, boy, that idea that you're providing a service that people are lacking, and that you can really be helping people as well as like making a living, made me even more passionate about the idea that the end goal isn't just to service what I want.
Right, and the connections that I imagine you'll make, and the classic there, you'll call a plumber sometimes and it won't be a big enough job.
Yeah.
They'll say, I'm sorry, this isn't a big enough job to actually
happens a lot.
Pay for it to make sense for me to do it. And so as a general handyman, you can come in and kind of be the first line of defense almost, to say, all right, this is something I feel comfortable fixing. Oh, maybe this is something that I could bring one of my buddies in, and, or a plumber I know, or a drywall specialist that I know. And so you kind of create this network of you're doing your job and providing a service that they don't have time or the, really professional ability to do, just because of the minutia of what you're working on. But then you can also connect those people to the bigger jobs.
And I feel very fortunate, because as I decide that I want to get into this, I'm talking to some people that I know that already do that. So Trent Connor, Brandon Holmes, Melissa Seville, and we all have the same mindset of we're going to help each other out.
Yep.
If I get a job where it's something I can't do, and I love that there are people around me that have that same ethic, that's no need to be greedy,
right?
No need to keep it all to myself. If you share the wealth, we all do well in the end. Yeah. And to be in an environment like that, I just feel really fortunate, just to have people that are like-minded like that, and that it's, and I think more and more people are starting to see that working as a group and a community and helping each other out is not only economically better, but just when you go to bed at night, you feel better about your life, and you're not just having coworkers or people that you work with, but you actually have friends, and
right.
And that sense of community is what helped humans survive for hundreds of thousands of years. And so being greedy and being selfish is the root of a lot of the problems that in society.
Exactly. On a broader level, it kind of fostering that community is really a defense against the divisiveness that is kind of choking our country right now. That I'm sure you don't agree politically with all four of those people.
Right.
However, it's kind of beautiful that you can come together as a community and help each other out even in that capacity. And it gives you more of an ability and more agency in your friendships and professional relationships to possibly have conversations at a bar over dinner that incrementally change the way everybody thinks.
Yeah.
Rather than, staying in your house or, just going from your house to your job every day.
Yeah. I hope that through this and that periodically me and the different people, either while we're working together, like you said, got to lunch or something, that we come up with ways of helping each other to be better at our business, to be better, to serve people better, just to do everything better. And I think that's something that you can only do by everybody kind of pitching in and not holding things to themselves and having an open discussion. And in a broader sense, different organizations that I'm involved in, I see that some are better at a free exchange of ideas, and some still kind of hold to that old ways of, well, this is my idea and we're going to do it my way. And having the podcast as a way to kind of talk about this as I'm going through the process. It won't be for everybody, but I hope that maybe people will see the benefit in being more of a cooperative, less greedy person, and that how it's affecting my life. And maybe it won't be the path for them, but maybe it'll just help them mold their life a little bit more in that direction, when you just see that it just makes you a happier person and more content with your life. And so I know what's working for me, and I'm going to keep sharing these ideas, probably more personal in the coming year than I was in the past, about what I'm doing and what I think about what's working for me. And hopefully I'll get more guests on that will help me formulate my thoughts, because I learned something every time. Like, I've learned a lot talking with you, because it stimulated my creativity and it made me think about things that I hadn't thought about before.
And thank you for the opportunity. I mean, it's same to me, just talking about my thesis, talking about how I've gotten to where I am and what I'm doing in the future. I find that every time I have a conversation, I focus on something new, and I see even my own life in a slightly different way, and so it's kind of beautiful to have these opportunities.
Yeah, and as much as we've had nice chats at church or something, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes here, and with very straight, deep questions and answers and deep discussion that I think is missing in the world today. You casual conversation at a bar is, how's the weather? Yeah, work sucks, blah, 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 I just got a new car or whatever. And I'm really addicted to this process, because a conversation on this level is so much better. You don't have to have every conversation be like, but man, it's nice to be able to, especially someone thoughtful like you, and that I've known for a long time. Like I said, we've chatted in the past, but to have an opportunity to sit down and have this in-depth conversation has been really great. And I want to thank you for coming on. I think we hit pretty much everything.
I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, James.
And come on again.
Yeah.
Next time you're back around.
Maybe this time next year we can do it.
We should do. Yeah. Maybe we should try to do it New Year's again next year and see how much things have changed and how we're thinking differently. And we've got some goals for the new year, both of us. So see where we're at, and that'd be really fun.
Yeah.
All right, Calder. Hey, thanks a lot, and good luck in the future.
Yeah, thank
everybody. Thanks for supporting the podcast. I was at a New Year's party last night, and 3 people came up to me and said that they enjoyed the podcast, that I really didn't even know them, and that made my day. And in fact, I uploaded the podcast that I just posted on Facebook this morning, but I put it online before I left the house last night, and somebody had listened to it before they came to the party and said that they say, yeah, I really like that local history podcast. And I said, I didn't even tell anybody that was out. So, man, that made my day. I appreciate all the listeners and everybody that's said kind words to me throughout the last year to help me encouraged to keep doing this, and keep listening. New podcasts will come out every Monday, and until the next one, see ya.